Facts don't persuade. I know, it seems a little counterintuitive, doesn't it? After all, whenever we are in any sort of argument, our first instinct is to showcase the facts that will very clearly persuade the other person to see the perspective that we see. But it's not always the facts that persuade, it is the stories or the emotion behind the facts that persuade. And unfortunately, we don't often know how to turn numbers and data and facts into stories that our audience can relate to. A recent study by Jerome Berner in 2009 stated that our brains process stories 22 times more effectively than they do facts. And a 2012 Stanford University study showed that storytelling allows for personal connection to the audience more than any other communication skill. So I'm going to give you the 5 steps into transforming your numbers into stories. Number 1, and this may seem obvious, but it is an obvious step that many people exclude in their communication, and that is to identify your goal. Usually the goal of a presentation, the goal of any communication is to persuade, inform, or inspire. Your primary goal is going to shape the way that you not only present statistics, but create a story from them. Here's a little side lesson. If you don't have a specific goal set for your communication prior to the communication being made, your audience is going to be just as confused as you are. Speaking of your audience, that is step 2. Know your audience. Now, it's impossible to know every single individual and every single individual's knowledge and past life experiences when you're speaking in front of a crowd. But you should have a baseline level as to what they know and what they don't know. This will also help shape what kind of story are you going to be telling with data. And that leads us to step 3, finding the story in your data. With this, there's 3 questions that you need to ask. Number 1, what stands out? Number 2, what is surprising? And number 3, and most importantly, what is the human impact? Step 4 is choosing the right visuals to represent your data and how it relates to your story. Now, this honestly is an entirely different lecture, an entirely different YouTube video for another day. But keep in mind that visuals should be clear, simple, and straightforward. Step 5 is creating your story and narrating it. I'm going to give you 2 examples. Let's say that you have the data fact that college tuition has increased by 260% over the last 30 years. Now, that is a heck of a statistic on its own, but it's still just numbers. Turning this number into a story could be as simple as creating a persona of a recent college graduate who is in debt, working multiple jobs just to pay off the loans that they got in college. You could demonstrate the benefits and the cost of having a college education and how, because college has become so expensive, families must choose if it's actually worth the investment. Now, that was a pretty simplistic example, kind of a slow pitch softball headed your way so that you could knock it out of the park. Let me give you an example of one of my own speeches that I'm working on. Some of the research that I've been doing for one of my talks is understanding how employees use time to either create confidence or how time decreases confidence. So I have 4 statistics and I'm going to show you how I'm going to combine them into something that is really actionable and a story that an individual can remember. Number 1, according to a study by the Steelcase Global Report, 25% of workers in the United States reported that they procrastinate for at least 1 hour each day. Now, let's keep score here. By my math, that is 5 hours a week. Number 2, a survey by Career Builder found that 31% of workers reported spending at least 1 hour each day on personal phone calls, emails, or texts, while 16% reported spending at least an hour on social media. So that's 5 hours on personal tasks and 5 hours on social media for the entire week. Third, a study by Harvard Business Review found that senior executives spend an average of 23 hours per week in meetings, while middle managers spend an average of 35% of their time in meetings. Now let's just take the 23 hours into effect. That is 23 hours in meetings per week. Finally, according to a survey by Adobe, workers spend an average of 3.3 hours a day checking and responding to emails. Now, if my math is correct, and I use a calculator, so hopefully it is correct, that means that workers are spending 16.5 hours a week on email alone. Now, when we add up all of those hours, that is 54.5 hours per week. Naturally, this is an extreme example, but let's roll with it. Let's pretend that there is a worker out there spending 54.5 hours a week on all of the tasks that I just mentioned. Now, 54.5 hours, that is a big number, and I can conceptualize how long it is, but there's a step missing. How do I feel what 54.5 hours feels like? Well, let's break it down. 54.5 hours equals 3,270 minutes. Cool number, really big number, but I still don't have a sense as to how long that actually is. So take those minutes and create a story. What could I do in that amount of time? Depending on my audience, I might use this example. Let's say that you are a huge Harry Potter fan and you want to watch all of the Harry Potter movies back to back to back to back to back. How long would that take? Well, that would take 1,180 minutes. Now, remember our very stressed out procrastinating worker? That worker that is spending so much time on emails and meetings and social media? This means that they could watch the entirety of the Harry Potter movie series more than 2.5 times. That's the amount of time that a worker is spending procrastinating, being distracted, instead of actually focusing on their job. That equation helps me understand what that amount of wasted time would feel like. Can I be productive at work? Or can I use the equivalent of 2.5 movie marathons of the Harry Potter movie series instead of actually doing work that builds my confidence? This is where you can get really, really creative with the data and the facts that you have and transforming them into your stories. If you have a data point, a number that you want to transform into a story and you're still kind of struggling with it, I'm going to drop in the comments a link for a free 20-minute phone consultation with me. We'll talk through the data point and how you can transform that into a story. As always, don't forget to hit subscribe and be up to date on all content related to communication, confidence, and storytelling. And as always, make sure that you come off mute and speak up your story. We'll see you next time.